The most dangerous moment in Washington is not always when someone shouts into a microphone. Sometimes it is when a nominee for one of the most powerful law enforcement jobs in America is asked a simple yes or no question, and somehow the room gets foggier than a cheap courtroom drama with bad lighting.
You said that Donald Trump has every right to tell the world that in 2020, 2016, and every other election in between was rigged by our government because they were. Yes or no, did you say that?
I don't have that statement in front of me, but
Okay, that was from August 27th, 2023, Thrive Time show. I'll put it on the record.
In a tense Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, Senator Amy Klobuchar confronted Kash Patel, the man seeking to lead the FBI, with his own public statements about election fraud, January 6th, the media, former Trump officials, and the FBI itself. And the shocking number hanging over the room was not just one quote, not just one podcast, not just one angry post. It was a pattern, stacked across months, across platforms, across public records. So the real question was not, did Kash Patel say something controversial? The real question was, can a man who once attacked the FBI, the press, Capitol Police, and even former Justice Department figures now be trusted to lead an agency built on truth?
Chairman Grassley has called him one of the most capable cabinet officials I've ever been able to vote for. Senator Graham has said, I have nothing but total respect and admiration for the job done by William Barr as Attorney General of the United States. Is Bill Barr on your list of whatever you want to call them, been referred to as an enemies list? You've called them deep state after serving his country as the Attorney General of the United States. Is he on your list because of a personal vendetta?
Well, it's not whatever we want to call it, Senator. With all due respect, it's not an enemies list. That is a total mischaracterization.
Amy Klobuchar opened with the frame that mattered. The FBI is not a toy for political revenge, not a talk show punching bag, not a museum prop for campaign applause. It is the agency that investigates terrorism, cybercrime, violent gangs, fentanyl networks, foreign threats, and the kind of crimes that do not care whether the suspect watches Fox News or MSNBC. She reminded Kash Patel that the FBI runs on fidelity, bravery, integrity, and then she did something prosecutors understand very well. She did not start by guessing what he believed. She started by reading what he said. That is where the hearing stopped being a normal confirmation exchange and became a character test under oath. Because when Amy Klobuchar asked whether Kash Patel had said Donald Trump had every right to claim the 2020 election was rigged by the government, Patel did not give a clean answer. When she asked about his comments toward Capitol Police officers who testified after January 6th, he did not give a clean answer. When she brought up his own social media language, January 6th never an insurrection and cowards in uniforms exposed, again, the answer slid sideways. And that sideways movement is the whole story. Because leadership is not just about what someone says when the crowd cheers. Leadership is what happens when the record is read back, the cameras are on, the oath is active, and the chair asks whether the witness can simply answer the question. Then Amy Klobuchar moved into the part of the hearing where politeness stops being useful and the receipts start doing the talking. She cited dates, platforms, quotes, and statements, because in a hearing like this, memory is not the standard. The record is the standard. And that matters because Kash Patel's defense kept sounding less like a correction and more like a fog machine. He did not say, that quote is fake, and he did not say, I regret saying that, and he did not say, I was wrong. He said he did not have the statement in front of him, or that it was partial, or that he could not fully respond without more context. Now, that may work on a podcast, where the host moves on and the audience fills in the blanks with loyalty. But inside a Senate hearing room, when someone is asking to run the FBI, context cannot become a hiding place.
Ask you, I actually used the words you used for the list, which was deep state, right? That's what you put at the top.
It is a glossary
against the Attorney General of the United States. Is it because of a personal vendetta that he's on the list? You're under oath.
I have no personal vendetta against Bill
Okay,
Barr.
he said about you, you would never be able to command the respect necessary to run the day-to-day operations of the Bureau. That was actually in writing in his book. He had virtually, about you, no experience that would qualify you to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency, and that your appointment, as noted by Senator Durbin as Deputy Director to the FBI, would happen over his dead body. Is it, yes or no, why you would put him on the list of deep state as a former Attorney General, Trump Attorney General of the United States, because he wouldn't break the law for Donald Trump? Is that why?
Absolutely not.
As you know, he repeatedly told the president in no uncertain terms that he did not see evidence of fraud that would have affected the outcome of the election. Did you say in February of 2021 that the election stuff was never my job and I stayed all of it all, I stayed out of that stuff?
Again, I don't know what comment you're
Amy
referring to,
Klobuchar
but
was
I'm sure
not
we
asking
can
him to
suffice.
explain a childhood diary or a private joke from a dinner table. She was asking him about public statements made on shows, podcasts, and social media, statements that built a clear political identity around distrust, accusation, and retaliation. That is why the exchange over the 2020 election mattered so much. Kash Patel had reportedly said Donald Trump had every right to tell the world that elections were rigged by the government because they were. Amy Klobuchar pointed out the obvious legal reality. Those claims were rejected by courts, including courts with Republican judges. That is not some partisan slogan. That is the legal system doing what the legal system is supposed to do: test claims, demand evidence, and throw out what cannot survive scrutiny. And here is the contradiction that should have made every viewer sit up. The man asking to lead a fact-driven agency appeared unwilling to clearly accept the outcome of fact-driven judicial review. Then came January 6th, and this is where the moral pressure sharpened. Amy Klobuchar reminded the room that police officers were heroes that day, and she confronted Kash Patel with comments suggesting officers who testified were lying or that cowards in uniforms had been exposed. Think about the absurdity of that for 1 second. The FBI director is not a social media influencer selling outrage by the pound. The FBI director has to work with law enforcement officers, protect agents, coordinate with departments, and maintain trust with people who put their bodies between violence and the Constitution. So, when a nominee has a record of attacking officers who stood inside one of the most traumatic security failures in modern American politics, the question is not simply, did he use harsh words? The question is whether he understands what those words do to institutions after the applause dies. Then the hearing widened to the media, and again, the pattern repeated. Amy Klobuchar cited his statement about coming after people in the media criminally or civilly, and Kash Patel called it a partial statement. Fine, but even a partial threat aimed at the press is not a small thing when the speaker wants power over federal law enforcement. A democracy can survive criticism of the media. It cannot survive federal power being treated like a revenge tool against reporters who made the wrong enemies. And then came Bill Barr, which made the whole thing even harder to dismiss as left versus right theater. Bill Barr was not some liberal activist. He was Donald Trump's own attorney general, praised by Republican senators, and yet he appeared on Patel's so-called deep state list. Why? Amy Klobuchar pressed the ugly question hiding underneath the polite language. Was Bill Barr on that list because he would not break the law for Donald Trump? Patel said absolutely not. But the problem is that a denial without a real explanation does not clear the smoke. It only leaves the audience staring at the fire alarm, wondering why nobody wants to say where the smoke came from. And that is where the hearing became bigger than Kash Patel's resume, bigger than Amy Klobuchar's questioning, and bigger than one nomination fight in Washington. Because the FBI is not just another office with a seal on the wall and a director's nameplate on the door. It is one of the few institutions where public trust is not decoration, it is fuel.
Do you know that under Chris Wray's leadership, he took over at a very difficult time, we all know that, appointed by President Trump, during his tenure, the applications to the FBI has, in fact, tripled. Do you think people would be applying to that agency, like in those numbers, if they thought it was so corrupt?
The American public's trust in it is at 40%. That's an all-time low.
Did you say that the FBI headquarters should be shut down and reopened as a museum of the deep state?
Mr. Chairman, are we allowed to go an extra time?
Could he just answer the question if he said that the FBI headquarters, where they investigate cybercrime and terrorism, should be shut down and opened as a deep state,
Mr. Chair.
as a museum? Did he say that the headquarters should be shut down?
Mr. Chair.
I deserve an answer to that question.
If people believe the FBI is just a political weapon, then every investigation becomes suspicious, every indictment becomes theater, every search warrant becomes a campaign ad, and every agent in the field carries the weight of someone else's reckless words. That is why Amy Klobuchar kept coming back to truth, not as a slogan, but as the basic operating system of law enforcement. A prosecutor can be aggressive, but the evidence still has to be real. An agent can be tough, but the facts still have to hold. A director can have political views, but the Bureau cannot become a personal revenge machine. And this is the part Kash Patel never seemed to fully answer. If he spent years talking like the FBI was corrupt, compromised, dangerous, and worthy of being turned into a museum of the deep state, how exactly would he walk into that building and ask the men and women inside to believe he respected their mission? That is not a media gotcha. That is management reality. Imagine calling a fire department rotten for years, accusing the crew of betrayal, mocking the station, and then showing up on Monday morning asking to be fire chief. You can give speeches about loyalty all day, but the firefighters will remember what you said when you thought the crowd was on your side. And in this case, the crowd was not just online followers. It was a political audience trained to hear deep state as a permission slip for suspicion, punishment, and purge. That is why the phrase, "I don't have it in front of me," became so revealing. On paper, it sounds careful. In practice, repeated enough times, it starts to sound like a strategy. Because Amy Klobuchar was not asking about vague rumors from anonymous sources. She was reading public comments, attaching dates, naming platforms, and placing each statement into the record. And when a nominee keeps demanding more context for his own words, the hidden message is brutal. He wants the benefit of the performance without the burden of accountability. That is the moral fracture at the center of this hearing. Words are cheap when they help build a brand, sell an image, or excite a political base. But words become expensive when they are read back under oath. Suddenly, the same phrases that sounded strong on a podcast start sounding dangerous in a confirmation hearing. Suddenly, "We're going to come after you" does not sound like entertainment. Suddenly, calling the press an enemy does not sound like commentary. Suddenly, placing former officials on a deep state list does not sound like analysis. It sounds like a preview of how power could be used if nobody asks hard questions first. And that is exactly why Amy Klobuchar's line of questioning had force. She did not need to yell. She did not need to perform outrage. She simply made the record sit in the room with him. The strongest evidence in that hearing was not one single quote. It was the accumulation. Election claims rejected by courts. January 6th comments that cast suspicion on officers. Media threats framed as accountability. A supplement promoted without clinical trials. A former attorney general placed inside the language of deep state after refusing to validate election fraud claims. Each piece by itself might be explained away by loyal defenders as exaggeration, missing context, or political speech. But stacked together, they form a pattern that is very hard to ignore. And in law enforcement, patterns matter. One strange comment can be a mistake. Two can be bad judgment. But a long public trail of statements attacking courts, cops, reporters, officials, and the FBI itself starts to look less like a mistake and more like a worldview. That is the point Amy Klobuchar forced into the open. The question was not whether Kash Patel could say nice words about FBI agents when the nomination was on the line. The question was whether those nice words could erase years of public language suggesting the institution itself was the enemy. And in my view, that is where the hearing hit its deepest nerve. Because America does not need an FBI director who loves one political tribe loudly and tolerates the Constitution quietly. It needs someone who understands that federal power must be boring, restrained, accountable, and allergic to personal revenge. That may not make good podcast content. It may not make a viral clip. But it is the difference between a republic and a punishment machine wearing a badge. So the lesson from this hearing is not complicated, but it is uncomfortable. When a person asks for power, the public has every right to bring receipts. Not rumors, not vibes, not partisan decoration, but the person's own words, placed back on the table under oath. And in my personal view, that is exactly what made Amy Klobuchar's questioning so damaging. She did not have to invent a scandal because the record already had enough sharp edges. Kash Patel's problem was not that he was asked unfair questions. His problem was that direct questions kept meeting indirect answers. That matters because the FBI is not a campaign stage where every sentence can be cleaned up later by saying it was taken out of context. The FBI is a law enforcement institution with agents chasing terrorists, cybercriminals, violent gangs, foreign threats, fentanyl networks, and people who destroy ordinary families while powerful men argue on television. The victims in that world do not need a director who treats truth like a flexible campaign prop. They need a director who can say clearly what he believes, what he regrets, what he stands by, and what he will never allow federal power to become. Because once the FBI becomes a tool for personal payback, the damage does not stay inside Washington. It reaches the whistleblower afraid to speak, the journalist afraid to investigate, the agent afraid to follow evidence, and the citizen wondering whether justice still belongs to the law or only to the winner. That is the moral center of this entire exchange. Amy Klobuchar was not just asking whether Kash Patel said certain words, she was asking whether those words revealed a governing instinct. And that is the question every viewer should sit with after the clip ends. If a nominee cannot plainly answer for his own public record before he gets power, why should anyone believe he will be more transparent after he has it? In the end, this hearing was a warning shot. Truth is not an accessory to law enforcement. It is the foundation. And when the foundation starts cracking, the whole building does not collapse all at once. It collapses room by room, case by case, oath by oath. So watch the exchange again. Listen not only to what was said, but to what was avoided. If you found this breakdown useful, hit like, leave your take in the comments, share it with someone who follows these hearings, and subscribe for more sharp, evidence-based political analysis.